Good afternoon and welcome to our afternoon session. I trust everyone had a good lunch and good conversation. Now we come to an exciting presentation, which is how God has gifted us and how we are spending the money that God has given to us. I'm going to call on Brent Charette, and he'll introduce and have some opening words.
Thank you, Brian. We in the church are really good at producing documents. The Future Directions piece has multiple page documents at each stage of its development. But one of the most important documents that we create as a church each year is the budget. A great deal of time goes into the creation of MCEC's budget. Starts in the fall with staff considering how the current year is going, what's going well, what do we need to change in order to serve the church. It then moves to councils, and back and forth we go, considering how many resources we have and what's the important work that we need to do. The budget document is the best expression of our mission and our vision for the church, and Sean will describe for you what we have planned to serve the church this year.
Hello again. I invite you to turn to page 41 in your report book. The spending plan that we're proposing for this year is contained in pages 41 to 43. I will be primarily on the slides going through just what's on page 41, which is a summary of information that appears on page 42 and 43. My plan is to just try to highlight the ways in which this budget might be a little bit different from last year, or some key assumptions that go into each of the areas that are listed. But if anybody has reviewed the documents and have questions about some of the details in the supporting schedules, then please feel free to ask that when the time for questions has come, and we're happy to address those things. So if you're looking at the revenue that we're anticipating in the spending plan this year, it seems like when I looked at it, I realized it seems like a pretty brave and bold thing, because we're actually projecting and putting in our spending plan that our giving from congregations will be higher than it was last year. Now, any of you that are part of a church know that it's not very often that you feel comfortable budgeting more than what you received last year. But we tried a new initiative this year by giving congregational treasurers the opportunity to let us know what their budget was for covenant givings to MCEC in their budget by an online internet interface. And we're really grateful that we received good planning information this year that could go into our spending plan. So that number of covenant revenue of $2,050,374 for the 2017-18 budget year, 80% of that number has been confirmed back to us with actual feedback from congregations in terms of what their intention is as part of congregational spending plans. And so while we recognize that at any point realities in congregations can change, we do feel really good about the revenue number that we have projected because it's based on mostly feedback that we have gotten from congregations. So again, we'd like you to take back to your congregations our gratitude for the generosity that all of the congregations show, and our gratitude for responding to our request for information, because the better information that we have from congregations, the better we are able to plan what we're going to do as an organization at MCEC. The rest of the revenue for this year is projected to basically not change from all of the assumptions from last year. Because of our revenue staying flat, in terms of our partner ministries, we are able to support our partners in the wider church, at schools and camps, and in publications through the Every Home Plan subscription, and continue to make those a priority in our spending plan. And I'm pleased to be able to report that all budgeted partner ministry support remains unchanged from 2016-17, other than the revenue that would go to MC Canada through the current covenant agreement, which is a percentage based on what our covenant revenue giving from congregations is. We're able to maintain our current level of support because of the generosity that congregations and individuals show in their support financially of MCEC. And so I would again point out that out of our total revenue, we are spending $1,193,745 in terms of sharing the revenue that we receive from congregations with these partner ministries, which leaves us with a net operating revenue of $1,004,714, for MCEC specific operations. So in terms of our operating fund expenditures, generally, we realize that as church budgets tighten and as our budgets tighten, it's important for us to try to be as accurate as possible in the budgeting and the planning that we're doing. And this year's budget approach attempted again to minimize the undesignated spending that's built into the budget. I'm sure any of you that have prepared or participated in preparing church budgets know that there are times where you put a number in just because that's what it was last year, and so we simply move it forward because we assume that's what it will need to be next year. We're trying each year to reduce the amount of items in our budget that we are proposing to follow in that way, and trying to be as specific as we can with what we anticipate spending money on, so that we can make sure that the ministry priorities of MCEC are not serving the financial priorities of MCEC, but rather it allows us in the budgeting process to work such that the financial is supporting the ministry. There's a few items I would want to note that you would see in the schedules for the various councils and areas on the supporting schedules on page 42 and 43. I just want to note that the Executive Council budget for this year includes $14,000 set aside for travel and other costs of sending delegates to the special MC Canada meetings in October to vote on future direction national church restructuring. Normally, because last year was a conference year, this year we would not have that in our budget, but because of this special assembly that's been called to vote on future directions, that money was left into the Executive Council budget to support delegate travel. In terms of our Leadership Council budget, I just want to mention that this year now is the first year that completes the budget transition of leadership training events from MCEC operations through Leadership Council to the Anabaptist Learning Workshop. And so as of this financial year, all training events and costs and revenue are now part of the Anabaptist Learning Workshop budget, which is supported financially by MCEC through Leadership Council dollars and through Legacy Initiative Fund dollars. So events such as School for Ministers, the pastors, chaplains, and lay leaders events, and other leadership training events such as those are now done completely through Anabaptist Learning Workshop and not through our MCEC operating budget. You'll notice that there's one line missing from this schedule compared to last year's results, and one line whose name has changed. And the two, of course, are related. In discussions during budget time this year, we felt that we realized that the role of our regional ministers was really to support and resource congregations and their leaders. And I feel that I can say, because I am a pastor, when a regional minister supports me and my ministry at West Hills, they really are resourcing my congregation by resourcing me in my role. And so what we did was we took the regional ministry line, which was salaries and related expenses for our regional ministers, and we moved them along with what we would have in the past called Congregational Ministries Council to a line called Congregational Resourcing, which is Schedule 4 in the documents on page 42 and 43. I want to point out that this congregational resourcing budget includes all of the typical slate of youth and junior youth and young adult events, and also includes dollars to support more intentional efforts through what Liz Weber is now helping to coordinate in her role at MCEC. It includes some dollars to support the intentional effort to resource youth workers, pastors, and congregations for youth ministry, and also includes some dollars that are designated to support the Relearning Community Initiative that we've been hearing about this weekend and that you might have been able to sit in on a workshop for. We're trying with these things to recognize that we need to start transitioning our approach to congregational resourcing away from one-off sort of things that are funded through legacy initiative dollars into a core piece of our budget that represents how we do ministry and how we operate as MCEC. And so this year is our attempt to start that transition by putting some dollars in there that are designated for specific purposes within those two functions. In terms of our operations, Schedule 5, it's particularly noticeable here, but present in all our council budgets, is that MCEC updated our approach this year to staff salary changes to better align our current salary policies with the most recent cost of living realities. And so this resulted in a one-time larger than normal salary increase for staff for 2017-18 as a one-time catch-up, because it was reflecting 18 months of a change in the cost of living as opposed to the usual 12. Going forward, this policy will not make any change in terms of how we have done salary changes in the past, but for a one-time event this year, that's slightly more of an increase overall than it normally would have been, because we were catching up from what really was lagging our salary structure behind the actual cost of living in this area now. And the only other thing I would note is that in our occupancy costs, there's a slight increase compared to last year due to the 50 Kent rent increases built into the lease that we have with MCCO as part of our occupancy of our suite at 50 Kent. And so you can see that at the bottom line, we end up with a surplus, or we end up with a deficit from operations of $163,077. As I mentioned last night, in terms of the actual results from the previous year, by policy, MCEC may draw up to 15% of the year-end balance of our Faithful Steward Fund, which is our reserve fund. I did get a question last night at lunch that others, or at snack, that others may have been wondering about. The Faithful Steward Fund is topped up in a couple of ways. When we receive an individual donation or an estate bequest that's greater than $5,000, by policy, that amount does not support the current year's operating budget, but it goes into the Faithful Steward Fund to be held as a reserve, to be used in a smoothed out way in order to gradually take the effect of that estate gift into our operations budget. There's also interest that the money that's set aside for those funds earns, because it's invested and earning about 2.25% interest every year. So between those donations and the interest, we usually end up not completely offsetting what we've been pulling out of the fund, but offset a fair amount of the amount that we pull out of reserves to cover our operating deficit back into the fund for use in future years. And so this year, the 15% amount would be the $163,077, which ends up with a net operating surplus or deficit of 0. And so we're pleased to report that the budget we are proposing keeps the deficit from operations within this number and constraint, which is by policy where we are supposed to be. So that is the short story, as short as I can make it, in terms of the budget that we have planned for this year. So I think now we would take questions from the floor.
Thank you, Sean, for the summary. So if you look at the details in your discernment booklet 41 and 43, if you have any questions now, we have mics in the aisles. We'll be adopting this spending plan later this afternoon, but we'd like to field your questions right now. If you have them for Sean, he'll address them as best as he can.
Jonathan Sealing, United Mennonite. Thank you for the explanation of the youth and young adult related programming. I know some of the details of that, working with youth and with Liz Weber's position being increased. Just came from a meeting at lunch of other youth leaders and discussing something about the past. So 25 years ago when I came as a delegate to these meetings, things were very, very different with what MCEC provided. And my question, just in short, could you consider a more significant increase in providing, and I won't use the word programming, because I know that's a four-letter word with MCEC these days, but providing support for youth ministries beyond the 5 hours given to Liz Weber's position?
Good question. I think what we see, Jonathan, for this year is this is the beginning of an experiment. We'll work with this, and we want to see it be organic and grow and learn. So as Liz works with, coordinates that role with youth leaders, we'll see what the needs are, we'll see what the potential is, and begin to look at whether that needs to shift and morph, grow. So we see this as a beginning point, an experiment, and we'll take it from there. So that's basically the approach we're taking at this point.
It brings us to our time of some group discussions here this afternoon for future directions. So I'm going to steal from Brooksy's quote this morning that we are church when we turn our chairs to face each other. So we're going to do some church now. So a few instructions. We're going to create groups of 8 to 10. Hopefully people you don't know as well, as you may normally sit around that, because this whole auditorium has lots of room to spread out. So we're going to ask that you don't leave the room, but you're going to hive off into groups of 8 to 10. Ushers are going to come around with a pad of paper. One person's going to be designated as a recorder, note taker. We want to get all of those pieces of paper back. And then I'm also going to make my way around the room and randomly select a few groups who will be asked to report at the microphone when we're done. So please be prepared to do that if I tap your group on the shoulder. We're going to take about 20 or so minutes. So we're going to see how well and quickly you can move into those groups. And again, please stay in the building or in this room and spread out. And then I will call you back. Other than that, I don't think there's any other instructions at this time, so we'll move into that right now, please. Oh, sorry. And the questions that you are to be discussing. Yeah, the weather or the Leafs leaving the playoffs early, all that kind of stuff is not what you're supposed to be discussing. So, one, what do you affirm about the proposal? And number two, what feedback do you offer that would strengthen the proposal? So the proposal you'll find again on page 26 to 28, 26, 27, and then of course Keith's presentation this morning. So I now ask you to go into your groups. Thank you. People who are reporting from the 5 different groups, so there was 5 that I had kind of tapped on the shoulder. So if we end up with less than that or more than that, then I'm just going to randomly pick a person out of the crowd. So hopefully we are looking for about a 2-minute response from each group, if we could kind of keep it at that. So a minute for question 1, minute for question 2, or you can designate all your time to question 1 or 2. So we'll start with this mic over here. Eleanor?
We heard you, Paul, but we're going to embody, I think, a little bit of our conversation. And one of the items of feedback was that we want to encourage better diversity represented. And so 3 of us are going to respond to embody that.
Perfect.
And an affirmation we had was to hear, Keith, the example of the aspen tree, and the vision of that unified roots was very meaningful for us.
One way to strengthen the proposal is that we continue to look at what makes it a vital MCEC, and looking how we need to reshape how, right now we have councils, but how might our staff and others serve to help us listen to one another as congregations. So for example, David Martin came and shared about the Future Directions Task Force in each of our area churches, each of our clusters, and then he has now posted those minutes on the website and has given us an opportunity to hear what's happening. But in order for us to have a strong area church, we need to listen carefully to one another as congregations, and that's a different internal structure for us as an area church.
Thank you.
And I was brought in to represent the whole diversity, not just in areas, but in the whole land across our country. And as we move from a national vision to a more regional vision for the congregations, what happens is we turn our vision in instead of out. And those of us who happen to be on the farther ends, like in New Brunswick, for instance, it feels more like people are looking away than looking towards us. And part of that then brings the question, why are we a part of this gathering? And it should highlight, as we move forward, the importance of our theological and ecclesiological center, that be the thing that we gather around, because without that, it doesn't make any logical, logistical sense for us to be a part of this gathering, except our shared vision. And how does our new organizational charts bring that shared vision to the forefront?
Thank you. We'll move over to this mic here. Alicia?
Some of the affirmations that we had are that We appreciated Keith's presentation, found that very clarifying and helpful. We affirm the desire to recognize the need to change in a changing world. We affirm the challenge for congregations to take more ownership specifically of missions projects. And we affirm equality between different regional bodies. Some of the ways we feel this proposal could be strengthened are we wish to encourage a very intentional awareness of diversity at the level of Mennonite Church Canada, and we wonder about how that can be built into the structure of MC Canada. We feel that there's a need for more details around the witness area. We wonder about where Mennonite Women Canada fits into this, and Mennonite, the Canadian Mennonite magazine, how that fits in. We feel those are important ministries. We recognize that there's needs to be different sometimes in different regions of Canada, that there is uniqueness and locality to each region, and so we wonder about how we foster strong national identity while also recognizing the uniqueness of each region. Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for those comments. We'll go over here if we can. Well,
Ben Castles from Waterloo Kitchener United Mennonite Church. Our group affirms the general direction of the proposal towards a focus on more regional and local bodies. We spent a good amount of time discussing, in some ways, the two options that are before us, which is either to go more centralized or more diversified, and felt very much, given the cultural shifts that we're familiar with, the generational shifts, that in a very broad strokes general way, we continue to affirm the direction towards regional and then local congregations also as the root here. At the same time, we continue to mention and raise up concerns about, and this is nothing new, but the loss of what it is that unites us nationally. And this is nothing new or unique to our group, and this has certainly been heard before, but there was discussion about the fact that churches relate to each other in very different ways, and so a church that exists in, for example, Kitchener-Waterloo, and another that exists in the Niagara region may not have actually all that much in common, and one of those churches may have more in common with another congregation in Abbotsford and one with one that's in Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. And those connections are important and have been important for many of our congregations. And there's a fear, perhaps ungrounded, but a fear that somehow this new structure, Future Directions, is forcing us into one mode of existing, which is primarily through the regional body. And for some of our congregations, that has not been our history, and that does not necessarily come naturally. And so we named that loyalty does not automatically get transferred. And so we can't automatically assume that we do away with some of these stronger national umbrella groups, and then all of a sudden we all get to know each other regionally. Mm-hmm. So simply to name that.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Yep.
Jim?
Okay, we had different perspectives in the group. On number one, saw the potential for better representation. It will be more grassroots. It's necessary because of financial necessity, and the study conference is a good idea. Okay. Feedback on number two, it'll be hard to get the diversity represented. Lay leaders might not go as much to study conferences because the congregations won't necessarily send them. The regional group will dominate, and the more national and international focus will decline. With that comment, international witness, who knows if it will continue. It appears at the national assemblies there will be more regional leadership domination rather than congregational stronger presence. Some regions do not have the resources to pursue their projects like MCEC does. If the congregation is at the center, more dollars will stay in the congregation rather than going to the regional church. Issues like BFC will never get the approval of all regions to come to the national table.
Good, thanks, Jim.
Arnold, Neufeld Fast. Our group didn't raise any red flags about the proposal, actually thought it was realistic given the times, feasible. The numbers given for attendees here at MCEC gathering compared to MC Canada gatherings helped to make that point. Not only did it not raise red flags, but I think there was a consensus that this new local focus that gives precedence to the mission of the local congregation is a good thing, and that if we focus our resources to enabling that to happen, that is a good future direction. We wanted to actually say thanks to all of those involved in putting the future directions proposal together. It's a lot of work, and we know that there was some tough feedback, and we thought that we wanted to say thank you to those involved, and we appreciate very much what has come about. With regards to number 2, we had a number of points. Some of them have been mentioned already. The missions piece is hard. There are international partnerships that have been developed over decades, and those need to be sustained, not by mission trips here and there, but by some kind of a body that can sustain those relationships. So we look forward to the proposals that would be forthcoming. We mourn the loss of, that this national family is somehow going to be a little bit less intense or less familiar, and we thought that there will have to be some kind of liturgical processing of that mourning that will need to happen. There was some suggestion that maybe even more decentralization should happen, say with regard to seminary training. AMBS, for example, is a line on our budget, but if we track where MCEC leaders have been, or people who have been ordained or licensed in the past decade, it's happening in different ways. And so encouragement to actually track where, from the grassroots up, where leadership education is happening, and to have the dollars also then support that, as opposed to coming in right away at the institutional level. Right. And this was a lunchtime discussion. There have been a lot of divisions in our history, and a future directions that would embrace the healing of those divisions. So in this case, we were talking about the fractured Mennonite groups in Waterloo County, right? Mm-hmm. And a property that's up for sale and 13 different Mennonite groups being interested in it made the point that a future MCEC should also be working at healing some of the past fractures and becoming a more credible witness in that regard as well.
Thank you. Any particular things you want to highlight or comment on out of those questions or statements?
So there's a couple of, I'm taller. A couple of things that I want to pick up and respond to. One was a couple of comments on diversity, and that's been a theme that's run through several of the conversations at the other area church annual meetings. So on Friday morning, Willard and David and I had a meeting with somebody whose expertise is in the area of diversity. And we had a really lovely conversation about how to bake greater diversity into the system so that we can assure and ensure that in the future, our leadership groups look more like what the church actually looks like, both at the area church level and at the national church level. And we're in conversation about engaging this person to do some work with us to help us to make sure that the delegate body at the national level actually has much broader representation of the variety of groups. But it's not just about getting that diversity into the room, it's also about making sure that the voices that are in the room as a result of the diversity are valued and engaged and begin to and shape the decision making. So we're in a very, and I will say that the question of diversity in leadership groups and in delegate gatherings, et cetera, probably comes up in every single meeting that we have with both at the executive staff level and at the interim council level. So this is a very, very live conversation. It's not, it hasn't reached into the public space yet where you will hear about it, but it will. And so there's a really deep commitment to ensuring that the photographs of leadership groups look a little different in the future. Please, thank you.
Before you go too far away there,
Yeah,
I'd asked you earlier too about that there's also diversity. There's a diversity of voices from across the country that are feeding into this whole process. Could you give the delegates some idea of how many different voices are actually feeding into that?
So just in terms of the numbers of people, this is a back of the envelope calculation that I did a little while ago. Approximately, this one's a guesstimate, about 250 people across the country participated in the workshops that were led by the Emerging Voices Initiative, approximately. That's probably a little low, because there are 8 or 9 of those gatherings. About 100 people, give or take, are engaged right now in the working groups that are going to be producing documentation in the very near future. My guess is probably about 900 people, when you include this gathering, at the area church annual meetings have participated in small group conversations like you just had, and I have all of the notes from all of those 900 people that have landed on my computer. And I have, at this point, collated 60 pages of one-line comments about the future directions process. Organizing that is, shall we say, a nightmare. I'm not a trained social scientist, qualitative researcher, so I don't have, there's some skills that I don't have, but the diversity of what's in those comments is really quite remarkable. And all of that is going to shape what comes next. So it's a really quite a broad spectrum. Two other things I want to highlight. Questions. There were a couple of questions around international witness. So one of the, and I'm going to link these two. One is international witness, and the other is a sense of being a national peoplehood, being family together across the country. Lots of comments have come in expressing the idea that those two things are disappearing in the new structure. Witness is gone. The sense of us being a national group across the country is gone. We are just fracturing into regions, etc. My sense, I said this morning already, my sense is that the structure we're putting in place has the potential to actually strengthen our sense of being a people together. As we engage in our conversations locally and feed them up into the national structure, we're all engaging in that conversation in some new ways. But we also have a working group that has been working really hard on this question of what is it that unites us? What is it that holds us together? and what are the things we can do in order to make sure that doesn't go away. I don't have that paperwork has not come back to me yet from the working group, and I'm told sometime in the next week or two I will be getting it. So I don't know what's in it. But I have tremendous confidence in the working group that they're going to come back with something really solid on that. The other thing is that there's an international witness working group that it's a really strong group. One of the things they did, I don't know how many of you responded to it, but they did some surveys, online surveys. They were available through the Future Directions website, as well as contacting a range of other people. I was talking to Don Rempel-Boschman, who's the chair of that group, last week, and he said he had 170 responses from people across the church. It was actually, for the narrow way in which it got spread out, is actually a very strong response. And they're working on a very concrete proposal to come to the interim council in the next couple of weeks that will, I'm confident, come with a strong model for how international witness will continue to be a strong program that doesn't abandon our partners. The actual modalities of how that's going to work, I haven't a clue yet, because they haven't told me. But again, it's a really strong group that I have confidence is going to come back with a really good proposal for how we should continue to do witness together.
Thank you. And for those groups who the ushers may or may not have collected your notes, it's extremely important that you drop them out on the registration table. There'll be somebody there to collect them. So if an usher didn't come by or you didn't give them to an usher, please make sure you drop them on the table out there so that, again, Keith has more notes to collate. At this time, I'm going to thank you for all of those conversations, and we're going to close with a word of prayer for this piece.
How about we stand for this prayer? A prayer for the future direction. Lord, if we have great structures but have not love, we have nothing.
If we have planned for the future with great diligence but have not your spirit of love, then our planning is for naught.
Lord, you have called us to love. You have reminded us that love is the greatest commandment.
May our structures and our planning for change be a reflection of this call.
In our conversations and our deliberations,
may we experience transformation through your Spirit, turning us ever more toward your call of love.
In our living and our working,
may we experience ever more your call to be reconciled and reconciling according to your love.
May we move forward in faith. May we live deeper into your mission of hope and healing in this world.
May love be in all and through all. We pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for those who are trickling in. We are on our home stretch here, and our next order of business is Fur Valley Warden Woods. So I'm going to call upon Paul Weidman. He's going to give us some context to what has developed since then and present the motion.
Yeah, so for those who were at Leamington last year, I believe you heard me say on this file that I was hoping to have something for you last year, and it's actually taken another 12 months of work on this file to actually be able to bring something to you of a resolution. So if you read some of the backstory that's on page 32 and 33, you'll notice that this bit of this saga began way back in April of 2011. So about the time that I started on executive council, this became an active process, and we're still here counting birthdays and not yet to the finish line. So we're close. And so I'm just going to highlight for you that The last paragraph, well, actually, the last two paragraphs. So, since 2012, MCEC has worked with WWCC to find an out-of-court resolution to this legal dispute over property ownership. Ongoing dialogue and trust building over several years led to a mediation session between MCEC and WWCC in December of 2015. Solutions for resolving the dispute were identified during mediation. The solution that has been accepted in principle by the boards of both WCCC and MCEC is outlined below. So our hope is that with this settlement, that actually is a basis for renewed working relationship together. So it had been strained, and I think we've come a long way to rebuilding some of that trust. I think we have a better understanding where both sides were coming from and how we got to where we are. I just want to highlight a few points. Number one, MCEC will be recognized as both the legal and beneficial owner of 74 Fur Valley Court in Scarborough. WWCC will terminate its legal action against MCEC, and MCEC will agree to enter into a 7-year lease with WWCC as that renewable at their sole discretion for another 6 terms or for 49 years in total. And there's one thing that I can definitely say: I will not be on executive council 49 years from now when this has to be spoken about again. So then you'll see the other ones they're just more details. So I believe we're just working on the lawyers are kind of hammering out the final details of the lease, but there's an agreement in principle. So what we're bringing to you as the delegate body is that there are a few things that we need to do. One is within the body of the resolution, there's the last piece that we need to change our letters patent to allow us to actually lease property to another not-for-profit organization. So it's an important part of the process is to have this resolution brought forward, and also is helpful in the settlement of the legal dispute that it's the wider body that has approved this settlement and not just the Executive Council. So I'm going to read the resolution for you now. Be it resolved that the delegates of Mennonite Church Eastern Canada authorize the Executive Council to transact on its behalf the settlement of a legal action brought against MCEC by Warden Woods Community Centre, along the lines described above, and to enter into a nominal lease agreement with WWCC within the terms of the proposed settlement. Further, in accordance with this settlement, the Executive Council is mandated to amend the letters patent of MCEC, permitting it to enter into lease arrangements for nominal consideration with other registered charities.
Thank you, Paul. We need a seconder. If you can come to the mic to state your name and your church.
Ken Fry, Rockaway.
Thank you, Ken. Now, are there any questions in regards to this motion that's before you?
It's Ken Dreger from Weidman Mennonite Church in Markham. I just want to really affirm what you guys did in the process here. I don't know how many years ago in Leamington at the annual conference, this issue was raised, and there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of hand-wringing, and you guys, probably wasn't you two who are standing on the stage today, but the people who were in your seats, who were wearing your shoes, took a lot of heat and a lot of pressure to just cave and just give them whatever they wanted. And I suspect strongly that if we had just rolled over at that time, the trust that you spoke of, Paul, would not have been restored. At least not to the extent that it has been. So I don't know what all went on behind the scenes, but I want to affirm you and commend you and thank you and bless you and everybody else who helped this to happen. And I'm just really appreciate what you've done and that it has been resolved in this way. I think this is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We do affirm the executive and the staff has poured a lot of time into that.
Thanks should go out, and I know Bryce Craker isn't here, but Bryce and I, this was kind of our personal file for the better part of 3 years, and he just did just tremendous work and really brought some deep wisdom to through the whole process. So he should get some accolades as well.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing that there are none, I'd like to ask those in favor to raise their hands. Thank you. Those opposed? So the motion is carried. Okay, next on the slate is our approval of the spending plan. I'd call Lloyd Redicop to come again to provide the motion.
Sean has detailed the spending plan to you earlier this afternoon, and I would just like to summarize or make some comments about it quickly. I believe that there are three components to our spending plan, and they're pretty simple. One is revenue. We have an 80% commitment on our givings on that side, which is probably the highest that we've ever had commitments for in the past. We have a faithful steward fund to cover or to use as well. Number two is we have expenditures. And about, to summarize, 50% is given to partner ministries, and the other 50% we use internally on our internal councils. That is also followed up with discussions and prioritizing and basically reviewing the funds and the ministries that happen within MCEC. But number three, the third component to any spending plan, in my opinion, is a team to execute. And I believe on a staff basis, we have excellent staff, we have excellent volunteers, and we have congregants who support our spending plan and have in the past. This plan is not our plan, this plan is your plan, or I should say it's all of our plan. So on behalf of the Executive Council, I move that we accept the 2017-18 spending plan as printed on pages 41 to 43 in the discernment documents.
We'd like a seconder to that. Ken Martin Elmira, thank you. And questions, are there any questions? The mics are opened. All right, seeing that there are no questions, I'd like those who are in favor of this motion to raise their hands. Thank you. Those opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, I'd like to call Jeff Taylor, Chair of the Gift Discernment, to present to you the motion 7.
Well, friends, it's my great pleasure on behalf of the Gift Discernment Committee to move that we adopt the slate of nominees that we presented to you this morning for the 2017-2018 slate of nominees.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Thank you, Autumn. And any questions? All right, seeing there's no one approaching the mics, all those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you. And those opposed? Thank you. The motion is carried. I would like to also ask those who are outgoing council and committee members to stand when their name is read. And we'd like to thank all of you who have served so diligently with your gifts for the church. And please come to the registration table after the session is over to receive a small token of appreciation. And it will be, I don't think I have one here, but it will be a generous mug.
Please rise as I call your name with our thanks. Peter Niemeyer, Terry Keller, Shari Nash, Steve Cox, Chung Vang, Lois Conrad, Mary Ann Neufeld, David Carr Priest, James Barber, Marilyn Zaire, Kevin Dirksen, Don Neufeld, Ryan Jancy, Laverne Martin, Dennis Gingrich, and Ken Ogasawara.
Please remain standing. I'd like to ask Marcel. Is Marcel here? Yes, here she is. She's going to offer a blessing for all those who have served on committee and on council.
Buenas tardes, hermanos y hermanas. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Voy a leerles como una bendición la carta de despedida de Pablo a los Filipenses 4, 8, 10. Por último, hermanos, piensen en todo lo verdadero, en todo lo que es digno de respeto, en todo lo recto, en todo lo puro, en todo lo agradable, en todo lo que tiene buena fama. Piensen en toda clase de virtudes, en todo lo que merece alabanza. Sigan practicando lo que yo les enseñé y las instrucciones que le di, lo que me oyeron decir y lo que me vieron hacer. Háganlo así y el Dios de paz estará con ustedes. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good to report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think of these things. Those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you. Amen.
So this brings us to a time of the open floor. Mike, for affirmations or concerns on any other subject or that we've talked about or that you haven't heard covered. We have about 10 minutes or so, so if you want to make your way to the microphone and state your name and the congregation from which you're from, and we'll start over here on the right.
I'm John Rempel from the Grace Congregation in St. Catharines, and I have a question about the covenant that's presented on page 29. I would welcome an expansion by someone working on this to the phrase in 2A, keep Jesus at the center of our faith. Could someone say more about what is intended by these words by way of a confession of faith?
I'm not sure I can give you a very complete answer, John, but I think it is a phrase that, in a sense, has been picked out up from some of Palmer Becker's work about keeping Jesus at the center. This particular covenant isn't intended to be a confession of faith. And so the understanding is that our confession of faith, which is a more expansive understanding of what we believe Christologically and so on, in that confession of faith, that is the confession of faith that undergirds what we're covenanting together as a Mennonite church across the country. This particular covenant is sort of the high level of saying this Christ is at the center. But the more theological explanation of that, I think, is held by the confession of faith. I think that's the best I can say for the moment. Was there more?
I just think that if it were more explicit, it would be a more meaningful foundational piece for more traditionally thinking Christians like myself, that there are foundations that we're very clear about, that we all hold to, and because we have those foundations, we're able to trust each other on the issues where we have different convictions.
Right.
So I would urge them to be more explicit. Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, something along that line would speak for people that this doesn't adequately speak for.
Okay, we will certainly pass that on to the group that's working with this, and it's a helpful piece of feedback, so thank you.
Over here.
Karen Scheel, Harrow Mennonite Church. Also with respect to the future directions materials, not what was in our discernment book, but other materials on the website with regard specifically to the delegates for the national voting conferences. Raised a bit of a red flag to me that I wanted just to raise for us to think about. Excuse me. On the board, or whatever will be the equivalent of a board, each region will have equal representation. But when you look at the voting delegates, MCEC has a huge portion. And in fact, when I ran my numbers, if I remember correctly, we outvote at least 2 other regions without help.
Right.
And so we come potentially to the table with an awful lot of power. And that will also hold sway in the fact that we're looking at, again, according to my most recent numbers, which as of today altered, we're sitting on basically half the national church congregations. So that'll probably mean that we're a pretty big piece of the money. So whether we start to think of ourselves as the power and start pushing the agenda, or whether some of these smaller groups start to see us that way and become intimidated and start handing us power, we need to be aware of this risk. Originally, when I read the documents, I was thinking, what can we do to prevent this and sort of keep us from getting so much ability to push the agenda? But it occurred to me today that maybe what we need to do is look at what we're going to do to keep ourselves from pushing the agenda and paying attention to what really is necessary for the whole nation and the national church, and being aware of what's happening in the other regions so that we can support them and what they need from the rest of us. And so I just wanted to raise that as a concern so that it is articulated and clear for us. And I guess on that same line, one of the things that we might want to consider is how we choose our delegates. Are we sending people who are going to vote for what helps us, or are we sending people who are aware of what's going on and can make decisions about the national needs and concerns?
Thanks. Yeah, those are great comments. I think mathematically, off the start, I think we'd be 21 of the 56 delegates, I think, is what MCEC would represent. There's been some concern mentioned that, well, if the West was to shrink and MCEC was to grow, if it's all based on a representative population, that disparity could become even wider. So yeah, I think it's really important to note that. What's interesting is that Keith had shared, and I don't know where, he's not up here right now, but he had shared that at the Alberta area church meeting, it was interesting that it was shared from the floor that this idea of disproportionate delegate strength. And a member from the floor had asked that it be, 1/5, 1/5, 1/5 across the board. And it was interesting. Another delegate had got up and said, well, that in no way is fair to MCEC, who does make up a bigger portion of that. So it's really neat that that we're the ones who are raising that, and I think it is important for us to be aware of the important role that MCEC will play in this here. I was in Winnipeg last weekend for Mennonite Church Canada annual spring gathering meetings, and sitting beside me was a member from Alberta, and I asked him, I said, what would happen if MCEC would have a very negative outcome next weekend? And he said, Alberta would be done. They just wouldn't know where to turn. So there's sometimes, there's power that can be used for negativity, and there's power that can be used to balance. And the one thing that I've seen at the table in the time that I've been there at interim council, I really can't speak more highly about the trust that's been built between the people that are there. Having said that, I recognize that those 5 faces might not always be there, and probably won't always be there. So we have to plan effectively for what it might look like when 20 years from now people don't remember these conversations. So thank you, Karen, for having that in the minutes. I think there are structures that can be put in place that continue to hold that balance regardless of what happens with population changes or congregational number changes and all this kind of stuff. But naming it allows us to actually build a solution to that plan going forward. So thank you. Tim.
If I could just speak to that. Thank you, Karen, for...
You should state your name even though I know who you are.
Tim Reimer from Danforth.
Yep.
I represent MCEC on Canadian Mennonite board. And last weekend we had our AGMs, and we talked about exactly these questions of equality and representation of stories from across Canada, and how our own Canadian Mennonite board is comprised. The same questions: representation by population or equality by entity. And I just think that we have a similar sensitivity there. And if we do, in fact, as a larger area church, want to be attentive to what are the concerns in other corners of the country, Canadian Mennonite is one place that we can pay attention to those stories. The Canadian Mennonite Publication Society, we're nurturing this new covenanting publication covenant, and we want to be attentive to those things too, so that we can maybe work in harmony with one another in that regard.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Some closing comments. For those who were in attendance last year, it felt like a heavy meeting. It really did. And, excuse me. It was probably made more difficult because I just buried my father the month before. But this year feels much better. And that's actually a testament to all of you. There's many who carry a heavy burden behind the scenes on behalf of the church. The MCEC staff, all the committees, all the people who care deeply about the church, and that's just here in Ontario. There are people who care about this church from coast to coast. And it feels good this year for me to be able to report back to them that we are lockstep with the other area churches across the country to build a strong and vibrant Mennonite Church Canada. You should go home here and report back the good news of the work that God is doing in His church. He is active, He is alive, and He will be with us till the end. Thank you. I'll call on Brent for some final announcements.
Thank you, Paul. I was encouraged during the last session to suggest to all of us that we all continue over the next several months to keep leaders in the future direction process in our prayers. I think we are served well by people like Paul, David, Keith, Willard, and others to guide us in this process. I know I will be praying for them. A few additional comments. Please fill out your evaluation form. We did a few things different this year. We had a concert on Friday. We had 2 sessions of workshops. We were at a very different facility. We'd like to hear from you what you thought about these 2 days. Please leave your name badges in the boxes upon your exit. If you have not picked up your congregational materials, please do so. We don't want to bring it back to our office and then have to mail them out to your churches. And finally, some words of thanks to all of you who presented workshops, to all of you who came up here and spoke, for spiritual directors who prayed for us, who led us in worship, in particular, Peter, Michelle, who led us in worship, and Ingrid, who helped with all the volunteers, billeters, ushers, folks that handled the food. We're very grateful for the work that you did to help get this weekend off the ground and going. I'd like to thank another group of women who helped make this event run from top to bottom, front to back, for Molly Mua, Lisa Williams, Joan Schooley, Margaret Oakey, and Liz Weber. That is our communication director and admin team. They do the majority of the work to make this event happen, and I think we should all be grateful for the work that they do. Let us be recommissioned. Michelle and Peter, will you send us?